Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another installment of the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee. We're obviously a little bit pressed for time today, so we'll try to go as quickly as possible. Realistically, I think we won't have time to cover our entire agenda today, but we were going to meet one more time this week anyway, at least. So we'll cover whichever bills we don't cover at that point. We're going to start today. We're going to do HB 9 and HB 819 at least. We're not going to vote on HB 852. We may have time to at least discuss it, and we probably won't make it to HB 1140 realistically today. So let's start with HB 9. The sponsor has one amendment. We previewed this bill before. This is a transportation equity bill. The amendment relates to people with disabilities. It's been vetted by both some disability group advocacy groups as well as approved by MDOT. Patrick, I assume this is yours. Do you want to add any other context for the amendments?
I can go through them real quick if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. The amendments alter the standards for evaluating transportation indicators, adds a member of the transportation construction industry to the advisory committee, and then for major service changes and reduced or canceled capital expansion projects, requires a transit equity analysis under the federal ADA to determine whether the change will create a disparate impact on disabled persons.
All right, easy enough. Does anyone have any questions about the amendments or about the bill as a whole? We did pass this last year in fundamentally the same structure. It was vetoed by the governor. It's back. Essentially, the only change is to try to be more inclusive to the disability community.
Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate to move this bill?
You're welcome. I will absolutely accept the motion to move the amendments.
Move favorable.
And I'll second.
Second.
Okay, I hear a second on the motion to move the
Second.
amendments. All right, all those in favor of moving the amendments say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments have been adopted.
Move the bill as amended.
Second.
The bill has been appropriately moved and seconded. And is there any discussion on HB 9 before we vote? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of HB 9, please raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? Seeing none, HB 9 passes. We're going to move on to our next bill, which is a local bill from Montgomery County. This is HB 19. If you guys recall, this is something that Delegate Moon testified in front of us on before related to parking minimums. This essentially applies only to Montgomery County and says that off-street parking requirements, especially near mass transit stations, are prohibited. It's a local bill. It doesn't ban parking. It just basically kicks it to the free market, and it allows housing developers to decide how much parking they want without any artificial minimums or maximum imposed by governments. Is there any discussion?
Move favorable.
Second.
The bill has appropriately been moved and favorable. Is there any discussion on this local bill? Yes, Delegate Foley.
Yeah, just Mr. Chair, I just would like to say that, I'll be voting for this bill, but I think this is something that the county council should do, but we're going to do it. So I'm in favor of it.
And I think that's a totally fair comment, Delegate Foley. And I think there have been some discussions, I think, at the local level about this. And I think that by taking this action, and potentially if the House passed it, especially if the Senate passed it, of course, but I think even if the House passed it, I think that actually could spur some of those discussions on the local level. So I think that's a fair point. Okay. Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor of House Bill 819 signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No one is opposed. That bill passes. House Bill 819 passes the subcommittee. All right, we've got House Bill 852. This is one of the chairman's bills. This chairman. If you recall, we're not going to vote today. This is just going to be for discussion purposes because we haven't discussed this before. If you remember, this bill essentially was trying to create an expedited zoning review process for houses of worship for religious organizations that build affordable housing on their land, but with an opt-out provision for counties that MACO desperately wanted to have, so that we are not sort of co-opting local control. However, we received I'll wait a second while Delegate Naraki connects to audio so he can hear this. We asked for and received a letter from the Attorney General's office. I'm happy to share that letter with any members of the committee, but essentially what the Attorney General concluded is that the core feature of the bill, putting religious organizations on par with any other groups that had expedited development in a county, is likely constitutional. However, by allowing counties to opt out of that, we would actually be allowing counties to religiously discriminate, and therefore the opt-out provision of the bill is likely unconstitutional. Because the opt-out provision is so important to MACo, I didn't just want to strike that. And so the amendment before you today actually changes the type of group that is impacted by the bill from religious organizations to charitable organizations. And so as amended, if we adopted the amendment, what the bill would essentially do is direct counties to create an expedited review process for charitable organizations that build housing on their land. Charitable organization, as you see here, is actually already a defined term in the business regulation article, and it does include religious organizations, but it includes other organizations as well, namely charities. As you can see, if you want to scroll down a little bit more, you can see the rest of the language is essentially the same. It just basically defines what an expedited review process would look like, which is essentially what we're mirroring here is something that Montgomery County already has, what they call the green tape program for affordable housing, as opposed to red tape. Get it? It's very clever. Essentially, the idea is to provide some level of prioritization and sometimes additional staff resources for affordable projects. This would be a little bit more narrow than the Montgomery County program, because rather than all affordable housing projects, this would only apply to charities that want to build affordable housing on their land. And we're giving the counties, we're extending a little bit, and we would give the counties an additional year. So 2 years total to opt out of this if they wanted to opt out. We think that 2 years is fair. That gives them time to evaluate whether this is something they want to do and opt out if they'd like to. So well, again, we're not going to vote today, but happy to discuss this for as long as we have today. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being open to the changes. It sounds like in part they were prompted by the response of the Attorney General, but I think you also maybe heard the concerns during clearly you did hear the concerns during the full committee hearing on the original bill applying only to religious organizations. So I think the expansion to charitable organizations to include secular organizations is a really good change, and I feel better about the bill. I wanted to ask about the issue with the Attorney General's letter indicating that it would be the opt-out language that would be of concern if you want to maintain that opt-out, which is understandable because MACo needed that for its members. Then does that concern go away? Did the Attorney General indicate that, or enough to know, and our ENT counsel knows enough to know that as long as it is expanded to non-religious organizations, then the opt-out provision would no longer be a concern?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, to your first point, Delegate Lehman, you're right that this was not purely motivated by the Attorney General letter, but was also motivated by I think the great discussion we had in the committee hearing around whether it made sense to open this up, for charities as well. Secondly, we have not gone back to the Attorney General for another opinion about this amended language. However, it's clear from the AG's letter that what makes this potentially unconstitutional is by allowing counties to opt out to essentially provide parity or a benefit to religious groups in particular, that is what invokes the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. By making this a charitable organization bill rather than a religious organization bill, it is secular. Now, it does still include, the definition of charitable organizations does include religious organizations, but if counties instead opted out to provide this benefit to charitable organizations, it would not, in my opinion, and I guess the opinion of counsel that I want to speak for them, invoke the Establishment Clause.
Great. And that is very reassuring. I feel personally, comfortable with supporting it with these changes. I was probably going to be a no if you had not done this, and you do such great work. So I do appreciate you being sort of sensitive to the concerns and responding the way you did to the AG's letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know just for the purpose of discussion, I would like to lift up that I know we talked about this in the hearing, that generally most charitable organizations are not the ones that tend to own land. There are a plethora of charities that don't really own land. They don't have acres and acres of land where they're able to then revert to a different use. Of course, churches were the ones that pre-pandemic had large congregations looking for different purposes for these buildings. And so that's just my only quote unquote concern, just for the record. I'm putting it on there for the record that I just am not sure if the purpose of that amendment is something I'm completely ecstatic about. I'm not going to hold the bill up. I'm just making it known that I believe, I think it was important for me to put that on the record from that particular vantage point and that standpoint. That's all.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Elliot Long. And just to clarify, all the organizations that were originally in the bill, in other words, houses of worship, they fall under the definition of charitable organization. So the bill still applies to all those groups. It would just, in order to make this consistent with the U.S. Constitution, it also includes secular organizations as well. And this would be namely, charities who do own property, who may want to expand. So, you could imagine like a 4-H club, for example, that would be a charity that solicit charitable contributions from the public, who may want to have some sort of housing component on there. So it's just trying to be fair to all groups that have a charitable purpose. And we're also just trying to make sure that we comply with the Constitution. But all the groups that we talked about in the hearing that have seen declining, roles in their church attendance, that got hit by the pandemic, all those same groups could still meaningfully benefit from this expedited review process. And the hope is the one thing that all these groups really have in common is a lack of sophistication and resources to go through what can be a very lengthy, tedious, and expensive process. And so whether you're a 4-H club or whether you're a charitable group providing services to the homeless, or whether you're a religious organization, none of these people are experts in land use and zoning policy. And that's why we want to try to lift them up when they're trying to build affordable housing, to make sure they can do so in a way that's affordable to them and therefore affordable to their potential tenants. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question with that change. One of the things that I thought you articulated very well during the hearing was that someone couldn't just create a religious organization kind of just to create one. Worshiping the spaghetti monster or whatever the case might be here. Does that still apply here? Could someone now, could they just kind of create an organization just to create one for whatever the purpose? Hopefully the purpose is good, but as I've learned sometimes in life, the purposes aren't always good sometimes for certain things. Yeah,
I actually appreciate that flag, and I'm not sure if the council wants to weigh in there on exactly the issue. If it is not something that has been addressed in this amendment, then I would be interested in addressing that, because obviously we don't want people in bad faith to be able to sort of take advantage of this. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my only thought at this time would be that you are defining charitable organization as it's defined in the business regulation article. So to the extent that those organizations are otherwise regulated or other conditions apply to the formation of them, those would still apply in this context. We're just saying that those things that the state already identifies as a bona fide or verifiable charitable organization now would be able to participate in this current or these expedited review processes.
Right. Which is to say that, because we're talking about charities and not in terms of bona fide religious organizations specifically anymore. I mean, if the Church of the Spaghetti Monster wanted to open up and actually solicit charitable contributions and provide charitable work, then maybe there's not something that I would consider a bona fide religious organization, but they would be under this article a bona fide charitable organization, and then they would fall under this new version of the bill.
Okay, that makes sense, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate that question. Delegate Lehman. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. A point and then a question. I think this right, that opt-out provision would be across the board. If a county is going to opt out, it's going to opt out on this expedited review for all projects. It's not like it can opt out on a case-by-case basis. So there couldn't be any concern about further discrimination, say if this was a secular, LGBTQ group or something else
Correct,
that someone
correct.
may conceivably,
Correct.
look to discriminate against, correct?
Correct.
So it's across
all
the
or
board.
nothing.
They're either in or they're out
It's
across
all
the
or
board.
nothing. Yeah, it's all or nothing.
Okay, and then thanks. That's what I figured. But the other question is about the affordable housing threshold.
Yeah.
Is that 20%? Is that a floor and counties can go above that? Because I would love to see that be higher, but is that just the
Me
floor?
too. Yeah, that's just a floor. And that's actually what Montgomery County is already doing, is this 20% threshold. That's what we modeled that on, is because we also didn't want to do, number one, we want counties to be empowered to go above, right? And we also didn't want to mandate a number that we thought was high, like 50, and then, not allow them to go under. So by saying
Right.
20, at least 20 is defined by the county. We just want to be as little, we just don't want to be prescriptive to the counties, basically. Because one other concern is, given the all or nothing nature of this, is if we set too high of a number, a county may say, 50 seems a little high, 20 would have been maybe more doable for us. And so instead of meeting us halfway and doing something okay, but not maybe as strong as I would have liked, they instead just go opt out entirely, right? So the idea here is we want to provide as much flexibility as the counties as possible, so we get as few opt-outs as possible.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. Any other questions? Again, we're not going to vote today. We are going to have at least one more meeting so we can discuss this further. And if you'll have any more thoughts, obviously feel free to share them with me. Okay, I think we do have time, maybe like 5 minutes to move quickly on. We may not have time to vote, but at least to discuss HB 1140. Y'all may recall this bill. This is courtesy of Cecil County. There is the Port of Deposit State Historical Park. This is something that the legislature passed as part of the Great Outdoors Act, the Maryland Great Outdoors Act last session, to essentially say that this land shall be distributed to DNR for the purposes of a historic park. We have some amendments from the sponsors. Essentially, what the amendments would do is to change the core feature. There are a few aspects of this, but the core feature is to change that from a shall to a may, which would provide, I guess, the idea would be from the proponents would be local flexibility about whether or not this park or this land is best suited to be a park. So that's those are the amendments before us. I don't know if Tristan, who has this bill? Is this Patrick? Is this you?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Did I miss anything on the amendments?
I'm checking, but I don't have any amendments from the sponsor.
Okay. Yeah. I think she referenced them. She may not, I don't think I saw them either, but she did reference some amendments. Delegate Lehman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I did not take my hand down from earlier, but since you
Oh,
called on me,
sure.
Are we just discussing this bill or are we voting on it? I just find this bill so confusing and convoluted.
Okay.
I have concerns about it on multiple levels.
If we have time after everyone's had their time to discuss it, I'm open to taking a motion on this one. We have 8 more minutes until the committee starts. So we can certainly take a vote if there's time, but we don't have to. We could kick this to the next.
Mr. Chairman, can I say something that might center the discussion a little bit?
Please do.
The Senate has actually passed this out to the floor. And I have the Senate, since it was today, I just got them right before the meeting, but I will provide them to Colleen.
Yeah.
Basically,
okay.
the Senate amendments kick the can down the road. They get rid of the shall may is in the bill, actually. And they replace that. They reconstitute the committee and basically say, continue taking a look, because the previous report, addressed some issues, but then raised even more. So they reconstituted the committee, said, continue meeting. They require a subsequent report, and that would be due September 1st, 2024. Then they extend the transfer date, which is currently June 1st, 2023 to June 1st, 2025. That's a year further from the bill. And then they have a permissive appropriation of $400K in fiscal year 2025 for archaeological and soil study.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay. Well, yeah, in light of that, I think probably my preference, especially given that we're running short of time anyway, is probably to not vote today, and we'll all have a chance to look at the Senate amendments and see if that's something that if people did have concerns about the bill, if they can stomach the Senate amendment. So I think we should hold off on voting day, but we can certainly discuss it for a couple more minutes. Delegate Lehman, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Mr. Chair, if you or our subcommittee counsel can explain, what if we do nothing at all? What happens if we do, in other words, not pass this bill?
My understanding
I
is
understand that there is.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding is that essentially the land would transfer over to DNR this summer if we do nothing.
And they could end up with parkland that's not appropriate for parkland.
Say that again, Patrick.
They could end up with this land, much of which might not be appropriate for parkland.
Okay. I'm not sure that would be the worst thing in the world if this reverts to DNR, but anyway, if we're gonna discuss it, I guess later this week, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Delegate Hammond. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do want to take a look at what the Senate did. I think that's prudent. But I do have a question in the meantime, because what gave me a lot of pause on this bill was that the local government officials were very much against this bill. What is our approach if that's the case? So we have a delegation that comes in and says, we want this bill.
Right.
And then we have the local officials saying, under no circumstances do we want this bill. So generally, like, what's our approach on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we take it as a case-by-case basis. You know, we don't necessarily always defer to one unit or one wing of the local government, and we don't always necessarily, you know, not vote favorably on a bill just because there is local dissension. But it is something that we should all weigh. You know, that I think this community has obviously not come together, and I was actually told that I think the town itself has elections in this year in May. And so I certainly think, you know, if we did decide to sort of kick the can and maybe allow them, it would possibly allow them more time to sort of sing kumbaya, if you will, especially if there's going to be an intervening election where the voters can weigh in on what they think, you know, the right approach is.
And Mr. Chair, if we could, I don't know how we do this, but it might be worth it to either go back to the bill sponsor or perhaps do it ourselves, to check in with the local officials who oppose and see where they stand on the Senate bill, since it's
I think that's
obviously
right.
changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I can try to do that. Thank you, Delegate Foley. Delegate Naraki, last question, and then we'll head upstairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would sort of echo some of our colleagues' comments here. This bill was one of the most confusing for me. Mr. Chair, I don't know, or maybe this is a question for Patrick. There was reference that the Bainbridge Corporation is like a quasi-public agency. Who governs that agency? I'd like to know kind of who is in charge of that agency. It was very confusing who owns what land, and there was private interest in conversations as well. So I'm very unclear as to who is actually in control. I appreciate that it would turn over to DNR, but I'd like to know a little bit more myself to feel more comfortable about who is actually governing that Bainbridge Development Corporation, other than the board itself. It's a quasi-public agency.
Well, you just answered the question. I think it's the board.
Yeah, and it is quasi-public, and I think that they mentioned in the hearing that they do have some developer partners. I think they mentioned that, you know, may be interested in buying this. So, but I can get you a better answer though before we meet again, Delegate Naraki. And I think it is a really important thing to understand exactly the nature of this Bainbridge Development Corporation.
I would, Mr. Chair, I would be particularly interested in how the members of that board get appointed to that board.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank
All
you,
right,
And Mr. Chairman, I think we should say, I think this is really a statewide bill, as it's dealing with a state park and potential state land.
It is.
Certainly,
Yeah,
as you said, certainly, like you said, you'd give deference to Cecil County's wishes, but.
Right, and they're split, right? So we need to figure out as a subcommittee how we weigh the fact that the local community seems very divided on this. But thank you all again for getting in a very quick meeting. We